I think we're good. So, GM, welcome everyone. Welcome to the space. I'm Teddy. I work at Starknet Foundation. We've got a really interesting conversation set up for this afternoon. We're talking with AJ from Radius and Apur from Karnot. We'll be touching on the topic of app chains, coordination layers, and a bit more. As we go, feel free to drop comments either on Twitter or YouTube, wherever you might be watching from, and we'll go through them as the session goes on. But first of all, I'd like to kick off with some quick intros. Apur, AJ, would you like to introduce yourselves, your products, and what you're working on?
Yep, sure. Hi, this is AJ. I'm founder of Radius. I'm doing the ZK and protocol research at Radius. Radius is developing a coordination layer to support decentralized sequencing for rollups. So thanks for having me.
Hey, I'm Apur. I'm the founder of Karnot. Karnot is working as a rollup as a service company for Starknet Appchains. So we essentially try to give one-click deployment of chains on Starknet. And we are also one of the maintainers of Madara itself, which is one of the stacks to build app chains using Cairo.
Awesome. Welcome, guys. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of the discussion, and perhaps the centerpiece of all that we're talking about is app chains. And since that is the centerpiece of discussion, I'd really like to know both of your thoughts on app chains, why they exist, their importance, and the value that they bring to any ecosystem, not least the Starknet ecosystem. Apur, AJ, whichever one of you wants to go first, feel free to take it away.
Yeah, sure. I think the app chains offer many advantages, like with full control over governance. You can set and enforce your own rules, ensuring decisions align with your community's interests, something like that. And also, you can design your own economic structures, including like tokenomics and fee systems, to directly benefit your users and incentivize desired behavior, something like that. So I think in a sense, the app chains provide like a customization, sovereignty, tailored economics, and flexibility for experimentation. So making them ideal for decentralized application, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, like, just to add on what AJ said, I think like app chains was pretty much like always like the sort of like the end game, like first we started off with like Bitcoin, which is like just like a dumb payments machine, and then we had like Ethereum, which was like, this is a decentralized platform and you can deploy like smart contracts, which are apps on top of it. Like the main aim over there was to show the world that decentralization matters and this thing works. And then it did work out, and then we realized that it's very congested and everyone is sharing the same block space. Doesn't make sense. In the parallel, we already had this thing in Web 2 where we could see that, okay, like this is how companies are scaling. Everyone has their own servers, everyone has their own code. Someone chooses to do it in Python, someone chooses to do it in C++ or whatever, right? And like everyone has their own sovereign code, and that's how it works. But in Web 3, we didn't have that, because we started off like with the bare roots. We said like, let's build this shared system where we show people that decentralization works. It did work out. And now with time, we have matured the technology to like use that decentralized system, which is Ethereum, or like for example, in the case of Starknet, we're also leveraging Bitcoin very soon. But yeah, we have developed the technology with ZK to leverage that security. And now it just makes sense to like go to the next step, which is like already there in Web 2. And the similar thing is, how do we use that security, but give everyone their own servers? So for me, AppChain, and like for a lot of like, I think people on working in the modular space, app chains are basically Web3 servers. So yeah, it just makes complete sense. Take your server and start building your own like Web3 app.
Totally. If I can go off a couple of those points too, I've always thought that app chains are also the end game, and perhaps it is in their name, and that they're application specific. First of all, they're not these sort of generalized layers. They can be, of course, they can be your generalized layers. They can be another EVM on top of Ethereum. They can be another Starknet equivalent on top of Ethereum. But primarily, they create these sort of secondary block space markets. And I think specifically those block space markets being tailor-made to specific features of a product, whether that product is Starknet or something similar. They, like you're saying, they enable that sort of horizontal scalability that we're also familiar with in in Web 2 applications, and they can be optimized for sort of application-related operations. And in other words, I think what I'm trying to say for end users is that Appchains are fantastic at abstracting away the many complexities that we might see in sort of our day-to-day interactions with applications on Ethereum, on Starknet, on Bitcoin. And what AJ is talking about here, I think, is perhaps the primary feature of Appchains on Starknet and with frameworks like Madara, is that they provide that sovereignty to developers. They're less opinionated about how you should implement something, and they give you that flexibility to not limit oneself as a developer and to build a product that meets the requirements as end users need it to be. But I think one aspect of Appchains that people come around to is that they often exist in isolation. And AJ, yourself, and Radius are doing significant work in this direction. And I don't want to say the word shared sequencer as sort of you're mentioning a coordination layer. And I know you've touched on this on the past, and that a shared sequencer gives the wrong impression. My question is sort of, is what you're building not a shared sequencer? And how is what you're building different in that regard?
Yeah, to answer that question, I need a bit longer explanation, and then please bear with me. Shared sequencing can be seen as like a specific type of coordination. It's a mechanism to support synchronous composability between sequences of different rollups. So from the start of our project, we've used the term shared sequencing layer, but we found out that this term led to misunderstandings when onboarding rollups. For example, people thought that shared sequencing layer controls the sequences or it takes profits from rollups, which isn't true. So we are here to support rollup sequencing in a fragmented environment, both economically and operationally, without interfering with their sovereignty or revenue. So we decided to use the term coordination layer instead. So Radius is developing coordination layer to support decentralized sequencing for rollups, aiming to enhance user experience. Let me start by explaining why decentralizing the sequencer is key for better UX and why a coordination mechanism is essential in this process. So decentralization here means that three things: censorship resistant, liveness, and safety. Currently, most rollups depend on a centralized sequencer, so users have to trust that this sequencer won't do anything bad, like a censor transitions or performing sandwich attacks. So beyond that trust, users have no fallback. And in terms of liveness, some recent layer 3 app chains have had a downtime of up to 53 hours, meaning users must trust that centralized sequencing will stay up and running. Lastly, for safety, when you send a transaction to the sequencer, it promises to include it in a block and post it to Ethereum for finalization, but there's currently no way to enforce that promise. So the need for coordination is clear when you look at how transactions moves from rollup to Ethereum. When you start transactions on a rollup, multiple actors are involved, like the sequencer, proposer, builder, and prover. So unlike centralized sequencing, Radius coordination layer enables these actors to communicate in a trust minimized way. So for example, shared sequencer is, as I said before, a coordination mechanism to support this synchronous composability between multiple rollups. So we believe that our coordination layer can help rollups achieve decentralized sequencing in a trust minimized way, leading to a better user experience.
Awesome. I know one aspect that you've mentioned to me in the past, and I think it's really interesting. You've mentioned sort of the importance of an ecosystem like Starknet, like Ethereum, being unified and being unified on the end user. And at the moment, like you mentioned, there exists with many different entities, each who have their own incentives, their own priorities, whether they are a layer one proposer, a developer, layer two, layer three, and so forth. That indeed causes that fragmentation, not just in terms of liquidity, but also user experiences, cultures, visions, but also, in my opinion, inbound innovation. And with a coordination layer like what you're developing, it really, in my opinion, enables that research and development, that collaboration, that work towards that asynchronous composability of rollups, but also that sharing of a vision, specifically related to users and building good products for those users. And in terms of a coordination layer, I'm really excited about how this introduces that ability to have that inbound innovation, to help that knowledge disseminate, that knowledge come into the ecosystem, that knowledge disseminate, and to help all parties who are using Karnot or using Radius to find new features, to build fantastic products, and to build an ecosystem that is sharing that common vision around a specific user. I don't know if you want to touch a little more on that coordination between specific entities, but I think it's a really exciting arena. Apurv, do you have any thoughts, opinions on coordination layers?
I do. I mean, like, so basically, yeah. I think one very interesting thing about the shared sequencing thing is like how it sort of enables synchronous composability, and which I agree is like very important in some certain scenarios. But I also do feel that a lot of the interesting use cases can be solved with like asynchronous composability in the Appchain space. Like, for example, I think Vitalik also had a very recent tweet about a similar thing where when it comes to like the UX problems in a fragmented Appchain space, I think if we solve asynchronous composability with good abstractions on the front end side, we can create very good experiences. Obviously, like not all the experiences that come with like something like synchronous composability, because then you have to rely with something like like Radius. For example, if you want like instant price updates from a Pragma chain, you might end up using a shared sequencer like Radius. So I think that's a place where I really feel like shared sequences will play a very interesting role. When it comes to the decentralization part of it, I'm a little like my thoughts over there, and I would love to get like AJ's views on this as well. Is for me, a lot of these app chains are like startups. Like you just start something and you want to have a lot of training wheels in the beginning, and slowly with time you remove the training wheels. I do agree, and I see the vision where in a decent like you need to have a decentralized sequencer set because it has its own advantages, right? There's no arguing in that. Um, but what I do see is that just in the beginning, the disadvantages, the cons of like starting as a decentralized space might be too high for someone to consider, which is why we see most of the chains today start in a centralized setup. But I mean, I'm curious to know, like, what AJ, what you think? Is it possible to have those training wheels and still tap into some level of decentralization, or maybe you have some different views on this?
Yeah, so that's why actually we applied this encrypted mempool thing. Because using an encrypted mempool to prevent this centralized sequences malicious behavior is a way to achieve both scalability and decentralization. Another way to stop bad behavior on the sequencing side is to introduce consensus, but it's really like somehow compromises scalability at some extent, which is really crucial for app chains. So with our encrypted mempool and our decentralized sequencing method, app chains actually can benefit from some sort of centralizing sequences while preventing this censorship and harmful MEV extraction can be prevented on the user side. So that's why we using this kind of
the encrypted mempool thing is definitely like something very interesting where like you can sort of prevent some sorts of MEV with that. Also, I would like not exactly mix it with decentralized because like this won't technically solve the liveness problem which you mentioned, right? Like it's still centralized and you still will have, for example, like the liveness issues, but it does solve, I think, like, a big problem, which is the MEV thing that you mentioned. And I agree that even in the setup of like a centralized setup, even if you want training wheels, something having like encrypted mempools is like a pretty good offering.
Yeah, sure. I totally agree. So we'd like to remain like a leader-based sequencing. So one leader, we can set up like a sequencer sets, and then one sequencer can be selected as a leader. This leader will build a block and then issue pre-confirmation for users, and then while these another sequencers, which are kind of followers to sync up this whole block building progress, when this leader crashes or stop working. That's how we provide this liveness for Appchains. So yeah, so we'd like to achieve this scalability with liveness or decentralizing thing as well. That's our approach.
Understood.
Yeah. Yeah, I think MEV is an interesting topic for numerous reasons. It's sort of a feature nobody asked for, but certain users in certain ecosystems continue to benefit from it. I also see no reason why MEV can't be a good feature for a lot more people. But I think what AJ is talking about in terms of encrypted mempools and censorship resistance is incredibly important for the vast majority of end users in any ecosystem. And it's a really awesome advancement to see in the Starknet ecosystem specifically. I want to transition a little bit over to Karnot and yourself, Apoorv. But before we do that, while we're talking about Appchains here, it almost like we're not addressing the elephant in the room, and that is specifically Madara. Apoorv, you and your team are significant contributors to Madara. Can you tell us a little bit more about it, why it exists, and why it's so exciting?
Sure, definitely. Like, so basically, like in one line, Madara is the only, like, not I won't say the only, but it is one of the very close to production stacks, close to being production ready stacks that allow you to launch app chains using the Starknet technology. So when I say Starknet technology, I mean like using Cairo as your language. You can use the same stone prover and like all the other advancements that like Starknet is coming up with, right? Like parallelization, applicative recursion. So basically, like all the advancements that you get with Starknet and all that tech in an open source format is Madara, but at the same time it's modular, right? So you can make the changes that you need. For example, you can add encrypted mempool, and in fact, we already have the Radius integration with Madara. You can have like autonomous palettes, which the Pragma team is working on, and like multiple other things. So it's basically a framework for you to go ahead and like build your own app chain leveraging Cairo. So that's Madara in like a brief form.
Awesome. I totally agree. And I hope I don't go off on a rant here. I might, but if I do start to digress, let me know. I think Madara is super interesting for two main reasons. The overarching reason is that it provides this sort of fertile earth for both inbound and outbound innovation. For inbound innovation, it's about teams and developers coming inbound into the Appchain space, into the Starknet ecosystem with Madara and having that sovereignty that we're talking about over the tech stack, choosing how that app chain operates, whether that's the opcode the VM is using or whether it's an entirely new VM itself. Developers need not be constrained by a specific VM if it's not the right one for them. I think a prime example of someone who's developing an EVM in Cairo that is not the Cairo VM specifically, but is Kakarot and their development of their ZK EVM in Cairo. But there exists so many VMs out there, whether that's your Solana virtual machine, whether that's a UTXO related VM or another VM that best suits your product. It's a huge feature that I think is incredibly important for developers to really hone in on and helps them build a product that makes the most sense for their users, not least the permutations of Madara itself, whether that's the consensus layer, whether that's the alternative data availability layers, whether you want to implement native account abstraction, custom fee tokens, no fees, the list goes on. I think it's incredibly important, Madara, in part, being a source of that inbound innovation, not least for research and development and building great product, but forming that sort of single arena for collaboration as the intellectual capital of the ecosystem continues to grow. For outbound innovation, I think it's similar, but other interesting topic. And I think outbound innovations really how does the knowledge in this ecosystem disseminate across the entire Web3 sector, right? And so with that sovereignty of Madara stack, you can build layer 3s on Starknet. Brilliant. What else can you do? You can take Madara stack and you can deploy it on Ethereum and have a layer 2 on Ethereum. Fantastic. What else can you do? You can deploy it to other EVM ecosystems. And what we're talking about recently is sort of Starknet as a rollout to both Bitcoin and Ethereum. So it's difficult not to imagine Madara diffusing across the Bitcoin space, manifesting as Bitcoin layers 2, not least perhaps with a Radius coordination layer to help that asynchronous composability across them all. And sometimes I like to, perhaps now I begin to digress a bit, but I like to rephrase that sort of that saying that software is eating the world, but rather say Starknet, Madara, and Cairo are eating the world, right? And while that original phrase I think looked towards more of how software was taking up the value chain associated with industries that were primarily existing in the physical world. Essentially arguing that software is revolutionizing traditional industries by automating processes, creating new business models. I think very much the same for Starknet, Madara, Cairo, Radius, and Karnot as well. They are eating the world, and that these stacks give that developer the sovereignty they need to focus on users, not redevelop the wheel like a lot of teams continue to do, and succumb to the shortcomings of doing so. I think that Madara with Karnot and Radius in particular, they create that framework necessary to start, like you mentioned, to prove they are startups themselves. They are businesses, and it helps us force more of an entrepreneurial aspect into development to focus on a real end user, like what AJ is talking about in terms of sharing a vision and uniting around a user. That said, Approval, can you give it a bit more information on Karnot, how it works with Madara, and why it's a significant piece of value for the Starknet ecosystem?
Definitely. And at first I would actually like to add on like the thing that you mentioned about, like Madara giving you the power to like develop whatever you want. And like we're trying to say, like a lot of times when we are like doing things here at Karnot, we do take analogies with the Web2 world, because even though like the Web2 world is like centralized and everything in terms of like DevX, in terms of optimizations, it has like solved a lot of the problems that we today are like solving in the Web3 space. And at the end, it's distributed computing, right? It's not like people weren't doing distributed computing before Web3. So essentially, like today, like the reason I said that is because like for example, in financial markets, everyone knows like order books are like very, very like it's the most efficient way to do your trading. And we know in terms of games, we know that the tech today is at like XYZ level, which makes such XYZ games possible. But when we're seeing on-chain things today, we see people take compromises because of the tech they're given with, right? We see people go with AMMs, not order books. We see people making like very, very basic games, and not like how we see today, like high graphics or maybe like high interaction games. We don't see them coming along, mainly because we're constrained by the amount of compute we're getting. We're constrained by the amount of cost that we have to pay, which is limiting experiences. And Madara is like that door for all these apps to forget about all those constraints and just build things that have the best experience, but at the same time they get the security of like being decentralized, or like get the security of whatever the base that they're settling onto. And yeah, we can go into like definitions of rollups and all, but yeah, that's like a big rabbit hole. But yeah, I just wanted to add that. And about Karnot, like I forgot to talk about it, but yeah, like what we do at Karnot is that we are like a one-click deployment solution for your Madara Appchains, and we want the development process for all developers to be extremely seamless, right? We don't want developers to care or think about how to set up your nodes, how to like manage the scale, how to do the monitoring, how to do the alerting, because running these chains and managing millions of dollars of funds, if not billions, is not an easy task. And especially when you're starting up, you don't want to care about these things, and you want to focus on your business logic, and you want to just cater to your customers. So what we pitch to our customers is that, well, let us handle all that for you, so that you code your business logic, you focus on your marketing and business, and like just Karnot will take care of the rest. And coming back to the Web2 analogies, like an analogy we like to give over here is Vercel and Next.js. So if you have done full stack development before, you have high chances you have used these two things, where Next.js is like an open source framework to build front-end applications, very optimized. Anybody can use it. It's completely open source, and that's how we say, that's how we like to talk about Madara. open source, you want to run it yourself, go ahead and do it. And it's a ZK rollup based framework. And Karnot is a one-click deployment solution, just like how Vercel is. So anything you build with Next.js, if you want, you can use Vercel to deploy it in a single click. And that's how we like usually picture ourselves in this space, and that's how we see our role as well.
Awesome. I think that
would like to add, yeah. I would also like to add, we are actually doing some very interesting things, which I would like to cover down like later in this talk, around like improving developer experience, like which is not exactly, which just works for Cairo, not specific to Madara, just improve developer experience for like development in this space. But yeah, just wanted to put that out as well.
I think you're right on the money here, and that developer experience is part of the reason why developers continue to struggle to onboard into Web3. Not least people who want to build products for end users haven't been able to do so yet. So I think this is perhaps a question for both of you in terms of what do you think that sort of requirement is? What needs to be done to improve developer experience to onboard the next 10,000 developers into Web3, the next 100,000 developers to be building actual products and businesses in the ecosystems that like Starknet, Ethereum, Bitcoin?
So okay, so I can take that up one first. What something that we are working on, that we have realized in our experiences in developing with Cairo and in the Starknet ecosystem in general, is not even Starknet, I would say in general in the like Web3 ecosystem in general in development, is that it's sort of different than the normal Web3 development, right? Especially if I talk about like the normal developers who are like not experts. Like in Web 2, how it works is that like let's suppose I'm using Node.js. I just write my code in Node.js. I call my functions one by one. If I'm writing a backend server, I'll probably use something like Postman, right? So I write my code, I write my APIs, and then I use Postman to interact with my code. And then I just, like if I'm using a database, let's suppose I'm using SQL, right? MySQL. So I go to MySQL and I just check, okay, are the values changing as I expected them to? Are my APIs responding the way I like them to? That's how mostly people, get started with. And the experts probably go ahead and write test cases for each of their functions, and they just test everything with their test cases. They don't need to run a Postman, or they don't need to interact with it. So essentially, today, I think in the Starknet space, we are at the test case point, which is like the easiest way to get started testing your contracts is to write these test cases, which is okay for Cairo experts. But a lot of people who are getting started, it's a pain. Like understanding how to write these test cases is a pain. If I just want to like quickly get started and see if things are working, it's not an easy process, right? I need to like probably write my Cairo contract. I need to then like fund my wallet. Then I need to declare it. Then I need to deploy it. It's a big pain, right? For a new person, this coming from the Web2 landscape, first he has to understand these terminologies, and then he has to like go ahead and test these things out. And now let's suppose I was writing a swap contract, right? So I created a liquidity pool, I added liquidity, I swapped, and I realized my swap isn't working. And now I change my code, compile it again declare it, again deploy it, again set up the liquidity pool, and do all those things again to check if my swap is working fine. Or obviously I write the test case for which like I need more prerequisite knowledge to do that. So what we're trying to do at Karnot is really make this experience better. And when I say make this better, the experience that we are aiming at is you just open your like Scarp or SN Foundry, whatever, and you go to your configuration file and you add this like specific config for our explorer. So we are making a dev explorer, and from now what happens is that whatever code you write, the moment you save it, we automatically compile it and deploy it for you. And at the same time, we show you a good interface where you can see all the functions of your contract in a very similar to Postman style thing. So, like for developers, it's like they're interacting with Postman, and you automatically have APIs for your contract. So every external function that you write in your contract becomes an API, and you can interact with it. And once you interact with it, you can see the results. And this, we are trying to do something like a database as well. So like you can see the entire contract storage like a database. So we are in talks with like Starkware to understand the VM structure for that. We had some good insights in our last conversation, and we think it's possible. But I don't want to commit on it like before we actually go ahead and try it out. But we think it's possible. So we think we can actually emulate the experience where like you make changes in your contract, you save them, we immediately show you these are the APIs of your contract. You can interact and see changes in like a MySQL database of your contract. Now, if you figure out something is broken, you go ahead and make those changes again, save it, and we make sure that we replace the same contract, but the storage is still the same. You don't need to even like set up the liquidity pool again. You don't need to do all those things again because the storage is persistent, and you can just test the new logic again like you were doing it with Postman. So that is like the experience that we are trying to build over here. Obviously, it's going to take some time to materialize. But we think that we have a lot of the engineering sides of these things figured out, at least at a theoretical level. Once we start implementing them, we'll see, like where can we get till in the V0 and the V1. But that's definitely one thing that we really want to do to make the Cairo development very easy. Another thing I would like to say about like getting the masses to Web3 is I think there's been a lot of attention towards getting normal programming languages and normal Web2 languages becoming provable, so you can just use them out of the box. For example, Rust or Wasm. So you just like use these already mature stacks and you just make them provable. So like people don't really need to learn like a new language like Cairo and JavaScript. So I have my views on that. I think that's like a very interesting use case. But like the first thing I would like to say is that if for example you're talking about provable Rust, then like Cairo is already very similar to Rust. Like if you want to write smart contracts in Rust and you want to solve interoperability between these smart contracts, then you anyways need to build a framework or some crate on top of Rust which you expect everyone to use, right? And at that point in time, like it's like either you learn how that framework works in Rust, or you can learn Cairo because they are like already very similar. But I do think that there is one advantage in having existing languages provable like Rust, and that's like the extensive library support. So there is like, for example, like if I want to build like a chess game, I can just import an existing chess crate which handles all the chess logic for me. Like it tells me when a checkmate has happened, it tells me if this move is legal or not, and so on, right? So I think that is very valuable, and and I think that that can really help to get a lot of developers. But like if I think about like the scope of that in Starknet, then I think one is I think that there has been exploration about actually integrating Rust itself in Starknet. I think it's very early. I think even Starkware or Starknet hasn't really come up to an answer to that, but I think it's definitely a possibility where like we could technically maybe write like LLVM in Cairo or Wasm in Cairo and make these provable as well. Or the second thing is one of the teams. I'm forgetting the name. Maybe you can remind me. But one of the teams built a Rust Oracle. So Cairo today, uh, sort of like I think there's some final integration left, and but once that's done, you can technically have Cairo use normal Rust as an like in the form of an Oracle. So it would be like your Cairo code can call an Oracle which says run this Rust crate and give me the output, and you get the output like you do. So it's Rust hints basically. Like we used to have Python hints in Cairo 0. So now you can have Rust hints using this. And I think cartridge from Katana, the cartridge were trying to integrate this with Katana as well. And again, this is an amazing place to explore in Appchains, right? Because Starknet might not do this anytime soon, or they might not do it at all. But if you want this, you can do it in an Appchain and you can like integrate it today because a lot of the code is already available.
Totally. AJ, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd like to explain like how our coordination layer benefit this Starknet Appchains from the perspective of Appchains developers. So rollups or Appchains were introduced to achieve this better scalability while inheriting decentralization and security from Ethereum or Starknet. So this is really indeed very promising approach. But however, unlike developing dApps based on a smart contract, there are a few additional considerations. So one of the biggest challenges is the need to run sequences independently. So this incurs operational costs, and to create economically a sustainable rollup network, it's really essential to secure revenue to support these costs. So currently, the majority revenue comes from the users' transaction fees, but Radius can provide additional revenue sources through its coordination layer, helping rollups build a more robust ecosystem. By solving these operational issues, rollups can focus solely on like developing their business logic, leading to the creation of more rollups and ultimately achieving the scalability goals envisioned for Ethereum. So how does the coordination help generates revenue. As mentioned earlier, multiple actors are involved in the process of finalizing transactions on Ethereum from rollups. There are three scenarios where a coordination layer between these actors can help generate revenue. First, since these users are the primary creators of value, preventing the attrition is really crucial for rollups to sustain economically. So by coordinating encrypted mempool and pre-confirmations between users and sequencers, we can prevent user attrition by avoiding censorship and sandwich attack. Secondly, coordination between sequencers and proposers can capture opportunities like a cross-domain MEV when building blocks with each domain. For example, a shared builder can guarantee atomic inclusion or atomic exclusion by simultaneously building blocks in two domains. Lastly, when sequencers from different rollups build blocks, coordination between these two sequences can capture opportunities like a cross-rollup MEV based on synchronous composability. So these are all related to sequencing. So through decentralized sequencing, shared sequencing, or even based sequencing, we can aim to help all rollups achieve economic sustainability within the decentralized economy, I suppose.
Totally. I think there's one other DevX improvement that I could name and that I think we should talk about while we're all here, and that is the DevX improvement of any Karnot Radius collaboration. I think it would be wrong not to talk about here because I think it's also a huge DevX improvement that can be offered to developers in the ecosystem. And those who know me would find it funny if I didn't talk about toolkits or toolkit theory in any sort of a conversation. And what that really means is that the more toolkits can be layered together. For example, Radius's coordination layer, Madara, Karnot, Starknet, Cairo, each of these are toolkits themselves. Not necessarily that they are SDKs, but toolkits are institutions that formalize specific interactions or features. And the more that these toolkits can be layered together, the more emergent products, the more emergent new business models can become. And that's one of the reasons why I was really excited to have this talk, specifically about coordination, specifically about rollup as a service, Madara, Cairo, Starknet, but specifically also on developer experience. Could you both talk a little bit about any sort of potential Karnot and Radius collaboration that we might look forward into the future and see, and how that can also improve developer experience in the Starknet ecosystem?
Yeah, sure. I will go first. I mean, Madara, it was the first rollup SDK that Radius actually integrated our features like encrypted mempool and shared sequencing. So actually, we have our own version of Madara that with these our features. So anyone can use our features as well. And then right now we are in a progress with collaborating Karnot to support Karnot's RAS provider that any Appchains who wants to build Appchains with encrypted mempool or any certain features from Radius, they can choose like some kind of options when using Karnot. Those kind of collaboration are happening at this moment.
Yeah, to add on like what you just said, like we're already their team was like one of the first teams to integrate their stack with Madara, and they've been here since the start. And we would at Karnot we would love them to be there as a shared sequencing solution and an encrypted mempool solution, like to any of the Appchains. And like if anyone wants to, if anyone that's using Karnot, we would do our best to integrate them with Radius. And ideally, the process we want to make it very easy as well. So one interesting thing I think where I like to learn from is what Paradigm is doing with RETH. I think they've implemented this thing called XX, which is like extensions on top of RETH, which is like very interesting on how anybody can come up and build extensions on top of the Ethereum node to add on into its capabilities. So we actually got some of that benefits out of the box with substrate and the palette structure, where like you can just add any new, you can either use existing palettes, and you can also create your own palette, something what Pragma did, right? Pragma created its own autonomous palette that just sits on top of Madara, integrates very well with all the with the Starknet palette, and it's provable, right? So you get autonomous contracts, and that's something similar we want to do with Radius as well. As like, we want to create a Madara extension repo where you have a list of all the palettes, and you can just choose which palette you want to integrate, and it just plugs into your code base, and you get this like abilities out of the box. So it's like an extension marketplace. But yeah, like you might be aware as well, like now there's this discussion about dropping off substrate. So that's interesting. Let's see how that plays out. But this is something we want to do, whether it's in the form of palettes and substrate, or we come up with our own format of it. But that's the idea. Like, there should definitely be an integrations and an extension marketplace that makes it very easy for people to add on to extensions, and it's like a drop. Like, you just pick it up and drop it in your Madara node.
Amazing. Before, as sort of heading towards the end of the talk now, if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them below the stream, and we'll get to them as they come up. One question that I wanted to answer from a good friend, Robert, about what would you suggest for companies and projects interested in building private app chains? I think not just private app chains are incredibly interesting. And those interested in building private app chains on Starknet should check out Garaga. Garaga allows for the efficient verification of foreign proving systems in Cairo. But one thing I would like to mention specifically around, if anything has spiked your interest in this call, anything we've mentioned related to Radius and their coordination layer, towards Karnot and building app chains with Madara. If anything has sparked your interest at all, I would encourage you to look towards the foundation. The foundation runs grant programs for developers building in the Starknet ecosystem, seed grants being the flagship program at the moment for early stage teams looking to take their first steps in the Starknet ecosystem. So if anything has sparked your interest, don't hesitate to get in touch. We'd love to hear from you, and you're more than welcome in this ecosystem. So my DMs are open. If you're interested in talking more to Apoorv and AJ, do reach out to them as well. I know they'd be happy to collaborate and bring you into the Starknet ecosystem as well. But like I said, do drop any comments below the stream, and we can get to them as well. With that said, in the meantime, AJ, Apoorv, do you have any sort of closing thoughts or anything you'd like to mention as we head to the end of the talk?
Yeah, I mean, like, just something very similar to you said, like what you said. Happy to help anyone to whatever extent it's possible, right? Whether it's Karnot or whether it's just Madara, feel free to connect. I really think that like every app eventually is going to become an app chain, because that's what just makes sense. But even if you want to debate that, my DMs are open. Would have to like always open to like have a lengthy conversation and learn. So feel free to DM me regarding any sort of help on how to start an app chain. Why do app chains make sense? What is at least our belief? And any sort of like development help in like we did announce like some time ago. Like, obviously there are these seed grants that you get from the Starknet Foundation to get started with, but Karnot would like to club with that and like give free hosting to everyone who wants to like just develop with Madara and get started. So if your concerns is how do you get started, how do you run the node and everything, we can do that entirely for you, so that you can just test it and you can see if it works for you, and then we can move it forward from there. So feel free to reach out.
Yeah, we also we'd like to meet as many app chains as possible, because we want to help these rollup projects, app chain projects, to deploy their network quite easily. So please don't hesitate to approach us. We can help you to build this kind of app chain stuff with this sequencing. Or if you want to know this about all the sequencing thing happening in like Ethereum community or anywhere, just feel free to approach me to explain everything. I'd love to have a conversation with you.
Brilliant. And I believe we'll all be in Brussels in the coming weeks. So if anybody wants to meet up there, I'm more than happy to. I'm sure Apoorv and AJ are as well. So don't feel free to hesitate. Don't hesitate to get in touch with us. I'd love to meet up with anybody interested in building a Starknet ecosystem, specifically if you're interested in applying to the Foundation's grants programs. With that said, I think we're free to close out the call with no further questions. AJ, many thanks for joining me this afternoon. Really glad to have you here, and take care and enjoy the rest of your day.
Same to you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Yeah.